Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another support webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the power of workflow. We've got some advanced workflow actions, rules, and other things that we've been hearing from customers they've really wanted to know about. So this is our 45 or 50-minute crash course through advanced workflow.
Right, and this is one of those things that is kind of tricky to go into an advanced workflow just because typically it's a case-by-case basis of what users and customers are trying to do. So we're going to try to go into some of the more bigger issues, I guess, that we can dive into, but experience and knowledge is supreme on most of these. So diving into it, we have your Navigant customer care group. So you'll see we have the typical staff here, and a new addition, we have Drew, who is a Navigant bring-up. So he is new to our team here. You'll probably be hearing him a bit on the phones and seeing his responses via email. So be friendly with him. He will be nice back to you, and we'll give you the support that you're expecting.
If he's not, let us know, and we can flog him appropriately.
All right, so some basic webinar things that we got going on here. First off, the audience is muted. If by chance anyone decides to toggle around with that, we please ask that you mute just for the sake of all the other listeners on the webinar here. The chat box is available to type in comments and questions should you have any. We will address those towards the end, or if we find that one is appropriate to bring up in the middle, we'll try to do that. At the end of the webinar, you will be receiving a survey. We ask that you complete those. It's answers like that that have spawned webinars such as this, where a lot of you have said that you've been interested in getting some advanced workflow knowledge. And then all of our previous webinars, you can go to that link below there and see all the different topics that we've covered. The support group does webinars such as this bi-monthly, and then Guy does our solution spotlight on the month in between. So feel free to go in there to get a little extra knowledge.
All right, so what are we covering today? Well, lots of stuff. We're going to start out with workflow properties. I think in order to really start diving into workflow in an advanced setting, you really need to know what a workflow property is, how they differ from keywords, when you can use them, and what you need to keep in mind when using properties. So we're going to cover properties first, just kind of lay some groundwork here. Then we're going to jump into our advanced actions and rules. It's really the heart of our webinar. We've picked 5 more advanced actions and rules. We've got 3 actions and 2 rules that you can use to really extend the power and the reach of your OnBase system through workflow and through automation. And then finally, I wanted to touch on workflow events and what they are. They were introduced, I believe, in 14. We got system events in 15. They're really powerful, and they're a unique way of applying workflow logic to to documents and to states within your OnBase system, really kind of transforming it into a living system. So let's get started. We're going to start with workflow properties. So the four things we're going to cover: what are properties, how do they differ from keywords, when would I use them and what do they do, and what should I keep in mind when I use them in my workflows. Let's start with the first question: what are properties? They're ephemeral containers for data. Let's break that down. What does ephemeral mean? They don't exist until they're created, and they vanish when your execution moves on. They're containers. They work sort of like variables if you've ever done any programming. They have unique names, and therefore data. They hold a single instance of unique data, with the caveat that a single instance could be an array of data items that are all the same kind.
We hope you are not lost yet.
Right? That's right. That's the kind of webinar this is going to be. So, how do properties differ from keywords? The most fundamental difference is that properties exist within workflow's execution environment. They exist either in the timer service or in the client or in the Unity client, wherever the workflow is currently executing. They do not exist in the database. This has some advantages. For example, they are much, much faster than reading from and writing to keywords, and they're a lot lower overhead. Workflow can just create them and destroy them as it needs them. There's some disadvantages, though. They're not tied to a document, which advantageously you can accumulate information in a property. If you're working with multiple documents, you can keep adding. Say you can use a property for a count if you need to count number of documents, but they aren't saved when a document moves on, which is very important to remember. They're also subject to scope. What I mean by scope,
Sorry, back that one up.
What I mean by scope is that some parts of workflow can't read other parts' properties. For example, if you have a workflow that's, you have one queue that you're working with a property in, you won't be able to get to that property in another queue because the property is not saved when the document moves on. And similarly, you can use the use scoped property bag checkbox in Studio or Workflow config to limit that scope further if you just need to use a property for a very short time. So, when would you use them? They're best. They're absolutely best for string or data manipulation. They really shine there. They're very useful in web service calls because you can send and receive large amounts of data. And you can send and receive a large number of small amounts of data. It's especially prevalent with web service calls if you have a number of XML attributes that you have to store or retrieve. So what do? They temporarily store data. They're not read from or written to the database. They have no size limits or naming constraints. Unlike keywords in the database, you don't have a 250 character limit on these. And they're really easy to create, they're really easy to manipulate, and cleanup is non-existent. You don't have to worry about cleaning it up. Workflow takes care of it for you. So what should you keep in mind if you want to start using these? Make sure they're actually there. Remember, they're ephemeral. Make sure they're actually there before you're using them. Their names are case sensitive. Property names, if you're referencing a property, the property names must match exactly. And they're not stored in the database, so there's no drop-down list to select from. So you have to really keep on top of your documentation. They require an extra action as well. If you're reading from and writing to a keyword, you'll need to use the set keyword from property value to write the keyword, or set property value, and you'll select keyword as the source to read a keyword into a property. Just something to keep in mind. A lot of the keyword manipulation actions work directly on keywords, and properties are just one extra step away. So, advanced actions and rules. Let's take a look at what we can do now that we know about properties. These are the 5 actions and rules that we wanted to take a look at today. Set property to expression, which is an action. Send web request, which is an action. Call web service. Yes, that's another action. Audit sample, which is a rule, and item has been in queue, another rule. So let's get started with set property to expression. Sorry, there's a lot of text on this page, but I'm going to try and summarize. Set property to expression allows you to set a property, like we just talked about, a workflow property, to the result of a defined expression. So what does that mean? It takes input data from one or really more properties, applies a configurable expression to it that you can type out yourself, and then saves the result into another property. And the reason why that's powerful is it allows you to really flexibly transform and transmute data through this library of like 64 functions, including string manipulation. There's advanced search and replace, and probably the 800-pound gorilla in the room is this allows you to use regular expressions in workflow. If you are dealing with complex textual data and you need to extract specific pieces of information from it that always follow a pattern, regular expressions are going to be your best friend.
And if you want to look at those 64 built-in functions, those are actually all listed out in the MRG for workflow, so that can either be found on community, or you can reach out to us and we can get you a copy of that as well.
Absolutely. So that's a big action, and I'm going to move right past it because we've got bigger actions coming up. I mean,
true.
Set property to expression is major. We could spend an hour just going over set property to expression.
I think we were kind of joking about it. We said that could nearly be an entire week-long course if you really wanted to. That opens the door to a lot, and that really, when used properly and used effectively, can make workflow just an absolute machine.
Oh yeah. So another thing that's going to make workflow a machine is send web request.
Yeah.
This action works with files and interfaces with the outside world, outside of OnBase. So it's used to accomplish many tasks, and the available configuration settings change depending on the type of protocol and the method. Basically what it does, it allows you to read and write text, documents, and property values to and from the outside world. And this includes the local file system local to the application server, any FTP server, including authenticated FTP servers, and to the web via GET and POST over HTTP and HTTPS. Again, including authentication. So why is it powerful? Well, I think it's probably becoming obvious to most of you. Allowing programmatic upload or export of data to and from OnBase, it's possible to integrate your OnBase system with a wide range of otherwise inaccessible systems, like web-based ERPs, CRM software, records management systems, SAP, EIS, stuff like that. Extremely powerful. So we've got some details if you're interested. Send web request allows the import and export of documents or files, property values, and arbitrary text. You can export arbitrary text. And again, it lets you use the following protocols: HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, including authentication, and the file protocol, which allows you to access the local file system. As much as I would love to pontificate on it, we need to move right ahead into call web service. Right?
We do.
Jason's his mind is just being blown right now.
So much.
Call web service is a sister function to send web requests. Send web request deals with files and the internet. Call web service deals with information and the internet. Officially, it's a wrapper around the .NET framework classes that handle calling web service methods. What it does is it allows you to send and receive data to and from XML or SOAP-based web services. Send and receive data. That's the major thing there. That's what makes it powerful. It allows you to integrate workflow logic and OnBase metadata, you know, the keywords and properties you collect about a document with outside systems. Some examples include NavApp, our rules engine, SAP or EIS, even external vendors. If they publish a WSDL, it's a web service definition language, you can interface that with OnBase using call web service, as long as they use a standard SOAP web service call. So we've got some bullets because it does a lot of this thing does a lot of things. It supports complex data types, including arrays of nested complex data types. That's major. You can grab a batch of documents, get some information about them, pull all that information into an array, and send it to a web service. That is very major. Similarly, you can get you know, an array of document information, pull it into workflow, correlate it with documents you have in OnBase. It's really major. It'll retrieve the information about those complex types from the WSDL, from the WSDL. It will retrieve the information about the SOAP headers from the WSDL, which one would hope. It allows the user to decide whether the task list execution should be broken. If there's an issue calling the web service, some web services just don't exit cleanly, so you can turn off break execution. It supports several protocols, regular old HTTP GET and POST, and then also SOAP 1.1 and SOAP 1.2. It does allow mapping to system keywords, including like document date, file name, all the little, they're not quite keywords. They all start with double chevrons in your keyword list. They're all set by the OnBase system, which is helpful. And then yeah, the user can test the connection from the application server to the web service using either configuration or OnBase Studio, which is really helpful, so you don't have to, you know, debug your code over and over again to see if you're just getting a connection. There are a couple of limitations though. Call web service doesn't support the data type, which is a bummer. And it also doesn't allow mapping to the inner text or inner XML properties of the system.xml.xml attribute data type, which isn't terrible, but being able to do inner text would make a couple of things easier. But like it says, this limits the user to specifying a single value for a SOAP header. Darn.
Jumping into our first rule.
Jumping into our first rule. All right. Let's think about what we've seen so far. We've seen an action that can talk to the outside world via files. We've seen an action that can talk to the outside world via information, and we've seen an action that can parse that information into usable pieces. So what do we do with this? You know, what if let's say we process claims and we want 10% of our claims, 10% of the people who file a claim with us to receive a survey to see how their customer service is. Well, you can do that with workflow using this rule. And actually using some of the actions that we've talked about previously. You can extract their email address from the text of one of their documents using regular expressions. You can interface with your marketing provider's web page using call web service. And then before all of that, you can decide how many customers get your survey using Audit Sample. So, do you want to take this?
What it does?
Yeah, I gotta drink some water.
So what it does, so obviously Audit Sample diverts a configurable percentage of documents that it encounters. So it is going to take, like we said, the percentage of the chance that it's going to be audited is about 40%. Why it's powerful? Far from only auditing, Audit Sample can, for example, be used for sending random service to customers, spot checking invoices, or distributing a small amount of work to a pool of new users. I think a lot of times that we see customers use this, they've kind of been doing this work manually because they didn't really know about this. They thought that it was something that was just another rule that was just kind of lingering in the background there.
Or would require custom code or some kind of Unity scripts to implement, and it doesn't.
Yeah, you can build this right in, and as long as you have the knowledge of kind of actions that can be put into place here, this can take what otherwise would be a manual task and completely automate it. And if you even think of the full spectrum of having stuff be sent out and even be sent back in, the possibilities are pretty endless on what you can accomplish.
So it's important to note that your audit percentage is completely configurable from 0 to 100%. And this is a rule, this is a workflow rule. So you add it to your workflow and you get, the true and false entries appear below it. Any documents that pass true, let's say you set it to 10%. 10% of the documents that go through this rule will go through true. So you can transition those documents to other queues. You can add them to other life cycles. You can send notifications straight from there, call your web service straight from there. Only 10% of those documents will trigger what happens in true if you set Audit Sample to 10%. Everything else will flow through the false side of the rule, which generally in workflow just means it continues on to the next action. So you can really drop an audit sample rule in the middle of a workflow and really literally take an audit sample of documents flowing through your queue.
Exactly. So if you do have those managers or supervisors that want to keep an eye on some things that are going on, but maybe don't want to look at everything, to get a purely random chance of what's going through, this can be a good thing you could drop in and let them use.
Exactly.
So item has been in queue. This is one that, when I first started learning and reading about this, kind of really struck a chord and something that I was intrigued with. So what this does is it checks if a related item has ever existed in the queue selected during configuration. If workflow log is purged, the determination of whether the items have existed in the queue before may not be accurate. What it does allows you to determine where an object has been in workflow. So we've seen a lot of workflows that may be quite lengthy, and some that, items get bounced around quite a bit to different supervisors or different areas and departments. Item has been in queue, it doesn't care about, everything else surrounding it or what's initially on the document. It is strictly looking for, has this item been in this specific queue? If it has, go this route. If it has not, go this route. Once again, the power in this rule lies in the utilization and kind of how it's applied. But if you think about this in different, why it's powerful, this rule can help reduce the likelihood of duplicate processing. So the same person is not going to get the same item again and again, as well as providing an automatic reporting functions. If it's been in X, set a keyword value to Y. It's slower than checking a keyword, but it allows you to centralize logic for checking document history, which can be a boon with more complex workflow. Once again, if you take out, checking the document or the item itself for specific keywords, and it's just purely looking at, has this been in this location? If it has, take it one direction. If not, take another direction. It's quite powerful.
There's a concept in workflow development called functional workflow, and honestly, if I'd known we'd blaze through this quickly, I would have written up a few slides on it, because it's a really powerful way to use workflow. Functional workflow allows you to reuse cues and logic literally in your workflow, not just when you're building it and you start typing in the action name and it fills in for you. I mean, like, you have one central queue that decides where documents go, and it's all routed through there. You have one central queue that applies that applies reporting keywords to a document based on actions and rules like item has been in queue. Functional workflow allows using and building large workflows and making them really manageable on the road, because you've got all these specific business functions built out into their own separate queues and life cycles. And item has been in queue really makes sense with a functional workflow, because you can, like I said, you can centralize your queue that makes decisions on where items have been in workflow, instead of burying that logic in system work and timer work and random keywords on documents. You can just ask workflow where a document has been instead of checking an obscure workflow keyword. So is it the workflow status 3 keyword that tells me if it's been to the approvers yet, or is it workflow status 2, or is that telling me if it's been through, if it's been through licensing already? I don't remember. Well, item has been in queue tells you exactly where the thing has been.
Yep.
And that, like I said, that allows you to build functional workflow, which I think that might be one of our next topics. Functional workflow is a really powerful, really different way of looking at workflow from what you might be used to doing.
Right. And one of the things that makes OnBase and workflow great, but is also the caveat of it, is that it is every workflow we deal with every customer is different, and you build it the way you need it to be built, and we do not see two workflows that are identical in any nature, any way. With these rules and actions, they're meant to be built in a way that is useful, but also completely customizable to what you need it to be. So, anyone, and I can think of a few people that I know that have, some quite single workflows that are quite large. This would be a great way to kind of break some circular logic if it's ever present in there. Workflow events.
Workflow events. So workflow events showed up in version 14. We've had like queue watermark configuration for a long time, I think possibly since 10 or 11, but it never did anything. Setting a queue watermark never actually did anything. You could set it, hooray. In 14, we got queue level events that can actually look at the number of documents in a queue and generate an event where you can take action on the number of documents in the queue. Then system level events were introduced in version 15, which it's a really interesting concept because it takes the idea of an event out of the queue and into the OnBase system itself. So documents that aren't even in workflow, documents that haven't even joined workflow or would never join workflow, can now generate events that you can intercept with workflow logic and capture information off of these documents and use them elsewhere. So basically an event is a task list. If you've ever used them in workflow, a task list just lets you organize a bunch of actions and rules into one logical container. Events are task lists that execute when certain conditions are met. It could be when a form is saved, or there's more than 500 documents in a queue, or something like that. The key is that they trigger automatically. You don't have to set up a timer for them. You don't have to press a button for them to work. They just go. And they are scoped based on what queue or lifecycle they're assigned to, and as far as queue and lifecycle events. Obviously, system events, as I mentioned, execute system-wide outside of workflow. So here are the events that are available in workflow as of version 15. Queue level events, we've got item removed from queue. So this would trigger every time something is removed from that queue. Assignment changed for load balancing. Anytime the load balancing user changes for a document, that event would trigger. You could run logic on it. Obviously requires a load balanced queue. or watermark limit reached, which is actually one of the ones we're going to take a closer look at. Watermark limit reached works with the watermark settings for a queue that we've had for forever. Now you can set these and events will trigger based on whether there's too many documents in a queue, too few documents in a queue, and things like that.
So think of that as in, your queue is a tank, and you have a line, and think of that tank filling up with water, and the water is your items in the queue, and when it reaches that watermark, that's the logic behind the name of that one.
Yes, it has nothing to do with an
it actually took me a little
paper.
It actually took me a while to think. I said, why is the watermark? It's not the document. So.
Life cycle level, we've got item removed from life cycle. And then our system level events, we've got one document event right now, which is Unity form saved, which is really major. And then WorkView has a boatload of events. I mean, WorkView, if you've ever worked with it, you know it's HTML and JavaScript is all about events. Well, we can capture a lot of the events that happen in WorkView when you're working with classes and views, and we can capture them and work with them, execute logic on them using system level events. And we've also got an event for filters, for when someone uses a filter. So the first one I want to take a look at is watermark limit reached. Now, if you've never set a queue watermark, you might be thinking, well, if this has existed for so long, how come I haven't seen it? Well, because it's, in this case, I'm using Studio, it's hiding in the Advanced tab in your queue, way down at the bottom, called Queue Monitoring. Nothing about watermark level or alerts or anything like that. If you click the Configure button on Queue Monitoring, you get this dialog box you see on the left here, and that's where you can set your queue watermarks. Now the event, I believe the event only works with the upper box, use queue watermarks, where you can set high and low watermarks for warnings and alerts. So let's see what that looks like. So when you set this event up, you choose the event type when you create it. So we have a test event here. It's watermark limit reached. What happens is when it's triggered, these event properties you see on the right, queue ID, queue name, item count, exceeding high watermark, going below low watermark, you map these to workflow properties like we had talked about before. You have to map every single one of these for these events to work. But then you can execute logic behind it to look at these things like, are we exceeding the high watermark? Are we going below the low watermark? How many things are actually in here? Using that, we can send, obviously we can either make decisions like this queue is getting too full, let's divert 100 documents to another queue, or we can send notifications saying, hey, the analyst queue is filling up. Is anyone actually working documents today? You know, something like that. Right. Or if you're doing automated processing, you can say, well, there's more than 1,000 documents in this queue. Something is probably backed up or hung. You should probably take a look at it.
This is a good kind of catch-all too, in case you may not have eyes constantly on workflows, and if anyone, instead of having to go back and say, hey, I think there's things backing up or stacking up, this is kind of a way to build in a event log or notifications built into it. So
yeah, watermark limit reached is probably one of the most useful events that's come along recently. Again, you set this on a queue. You have to set your queue monitoring first. That will start generating the events. Then you have to capture the events by creating a watermark limit reached queue event. Once you have that created, it looks just like an ad hoc task or a task list or anything like that, or a timer, and you can add logic beneath it. I believe in this case, this one does not end up pulling the document over. Some of the events do end up carrying the document along with them. Watermark limit reach it simply sends these property values to whatever properties you've configured, and then you can work with that yourself.
Next one we're going to jump into Unity form saved. So once again, system events are event-driven tasks related to specific items in workflow. System events are not tied to life cycles or queues. Instead, they are executed when an event or status change occurs to a specific type of item in workflow. Unity form saved is a very powerful and useful tool that if you have a Unity form that is maybe something that is updated more than just once, and people are going in and making changes, what it allows it to do is say someone went in and saved this Unity form, hopefully with changes on there. Once that has come up, now let's trigger this workflow event.
Probably the most frequently used example for this is if you have an AP system with invoices and POs, and then you've got an invoice coding form that's a Unity form. So if someone goes into the Unity form and changes either, changes maybe the amount, and then hits Unity form saved, saves the form. The Unity form saved event triggers. You can examine that Unity form. In this case, this is one of the events that does pull the document along with it, the triggering document. So you can take a look at that, at any of the keywords on the document, say the amount, and compare it back to the actual invoice itself and make sure that they agree. And if they don't, you can flag it, you can change it, whatever you want to do with workflow. But Unity form saved, the key with Unity form saved is it applies to new forms that are created. It applies to shared forms if you're using shared Unity forms and publishing them externally. It applies to Unity forms that never touch workflow as well, in case that they have, if they have related documents that do exist in workflow, you can still tie their data back to those documents that are working in workflow. So again, you set it up similarly to the previous event. You decide you're going to make a system event, and you pick Unity form saved, and you're presented with this on the right. Again, you get a bunch of properties that you need to map to workflow properties. You have to map every single one of these properties to make sure it works. But then this will also, in the logic below, this will also be working on the form itself. But you get some information like the form template ID, the template name, the name of the Unity form, what revision it is, a work item type ID, so you know what kind of object you're working on, and whether it's new or not, which is important in a lot of logic. Because if it's not new, maybe you don't want to execute this logic. If it is new, maybe you want to, drop it into the new forms queue or something like that. But as the PowerPoint says, this is a great way to send notifications when Unity forms are updated and saved. Say if you have a Unity form that shouldn't be updated and it gets updated, you can use this this event as kind of a catch-all to say, hey, someone might be tampering with this. Free of normal rules and restrictions. Well, it's still subject to any of the rules and restrictions that workflow has to follow. So anything that you can do in workflow, you can do to this, but that's it. Again, you can use, obviously audit percentage doesn't make any sense to use, but you can use set property to expression. You can use you can have rules in here to check and see if a particular keyword is filled or not. You can obviously check that is new property, see if it's new or not. And yeah, we just covered, we mapped them all to workflow properties.
Exactly. So I know what we threw at you over the last 45 minutes probably could have also been summed up in, not summed up, but could have been taught over 45 days. There's a lot, especially with set property to expression. But the main thing we wanted to kind of cover here was that we do have a lot that, there may not be much that people are specifically using at the time, but there's a lot that's going on.
If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the chat or in the questions box. We went over a lot of stuff today, and we've got Oh, we've got what, 10 minutes left. You want to show off what set properties to expression can do?
Should.
Oh, I always love unscheduled live demos.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got one of our lab machines here. Jason's going to hop into Studio real quick. And we're going to show you what set property to expression can really do, especially with the power of regular expressions. You can really do some amazing stuff with that. Nothing like watching a loading bar. Oh, that's great. This thing was super snappy for me yesterday. Of course, it's slow today.
How is it?
Oh, yeah. Live demos, they don't get any better than this. All right, so I've got a test lifecycle down there. It should be called test lifecycle or something like that. If we expand that, so go into the do something. We should have got some load balancing work in here. I have my, oh, we've got events. See the events on the lifecycle? There we go. So there's one of our lifecycle events. This is one of the item removed from lifecycle events. Yep, go ahead and check it out because we're going to work with set property to expression. Okay, so hop into the initial queue system work. And let's make a new action right in system work. Give it a name. We're going to call this test action. Let's call it test action 4 because apparently it's linked. Hey, look at that. It's already test property to expression. It's like I've tested this before.
Exactly.
All right. So in this case, we've got set property to expression set over here on the right. You can see this. If you click on the test button, you can test your expression, and it can be any of these functions that we talked about. Hit the show list button so you can see what we're talking about. These are all of the keywords and functions available to you. So click on the functions tab there. These are just the built-in functions.
Quite a list.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot in here that this can do, and this is just one. This is just this action, this set property to expression can do all of this stuff. In this case, we are using the match function, which allows you to search a string using a regular expression. Go ahead and click off that. There you go. And let's replace, so right now we're going to be reading some text from a property called prop sum text. Let's replace prop sum text with some actual text so we can see what this does. So remove the %v that indicates property, and we'll do double quotes. And let's do, we are searching for, this regular expression is searching for an email address. So let's throw some random text in here. So we are searching for an email address, sort of like Yeah, something at somewhere.com, period. This is a long sentence. Keep going. This is a long sentence, blah, blah, and then end it with a double quote. All right, so we have this giant string of text here, right? And there's an email address sitting right in the middle of it. We want it. Yep, so let's take a look at that regular expression. Go over that really quickly. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, it's definitely something you should take a look at. There are a couple of websites online where you can test regular expressions in your browser, which is really helpful because if you're like me at all, you learn by doing rather than by reading. So in this case, we're starting with /B, which is a word boundary. Next, we've got a match group. That's the square brackets. That's a match group, and we are looking for, oh, that's really blurry. We're looking for words that contain anything, which is the dot. They can also contain literally %, pluses, or minuses. That's the end of that match group. Then we're adding another match group, actually a literal @ sign, followed by another match group, which is words that contain anything, including dashes. That is what that means. /W dot minus means words that contain anything and minus signs. Then we add another literal dot. This is where we're looking for the .com part of the address. The \dot is a literal dot, and then another match group of A through Z or A through Z. That's any lower or uppercase letters, but we've got curly brackets on the end that say only between 2 and 6 of those characters. And then finally, we've got another argument on the very end there that 0 in quotes tells workflow that we are looking at this case sensitively. So let's go ahead and hit the test button and see what we get. Ta-da! Look at that. The value is something at somewhere.com. We took all of that text and we turned it into an email address. So again, you can save that out to a property. Say you have some random text, even just like the text of an email. You could pull all email addresses out of that email using an expression like this. You have an instant mailing list. So hit OK. Let's prove that it's working by mangling that email address. Let's make it not a real email address. So let's put a few periods in there and some extra @ signs.
So that would not obviously work as...
Actually, it's probably going to grab that first, so@net.hi.
Oh, you're right.
Because that's going to look like totally going to look like one. And some@where.com is going to come out. I bet that's what we're going to get. Now that should not. That is not an email address. So what do we get? Oh, we get ng@somewhere.com. That's what it is. Throw an extra @ sign in the expression. So @somewhere.com. That should give us nothing. Yep, and we get a blank value. So it will find email addresses. It will definitely find anything that looks like an email address. But it does a lot more than that. If you know regular expressions, you know how powerful this is. You probably have your eyes wide right now, seeing that you can do this in workflow in a standard action, which you can put anywhere, including in an event or a system event, including Unity forms saved. So yeah, and that about wraps it up for today.
Exactly. Jump right back into. So as we mentioned before, our online resources, feel free to go to our blog.navient-inc.com to see our technical blog that Pixie updates frequently. You can also check out onbase.com/community. We hope you guys all have community accounts. That is kind of the open forum for all OnBase users. It's where Highland goes to answer your questions, should you have any. Also, if you are ever in a pinch and need to find an MRG or any other kind of useful tidbits of knowledge are all out there as well.
So, do we have any questions?
There are None at the moment. We will skip right through.
Well, I mean, if anybody's got any questions, we covered a lot of stuff today. Quite a lot.
Yeah, please use the chat box in the GoToMeeting window should you have a question we can answer for you.
Looks like no questions. All right, I expect to see set property to expression in all of your workflows now. So the current versions, we're on OnBase 15, eagerly awaiting the release of 16, which I'm sure is going to come within the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, we are on Service Pack 2 now of 15.02.174. Kofax Capture is still at version 10. VRS Elite is 5.1 R2. Cellform is version 10.8. And Brainware is up to version 5.6 Service Pack 2. So our next webinar is going to be May 18th. We've yet to determine the topic. Remember, when you get your webinar surveys, let us know what you want to hear about. Otherwise, I think maybe a functional webinar demonstration on how that works and why it makes working with workflow that much easier. We'll think about it.
Exactly. Our next Naviant conference is going to be this October coming up. Last year's conference was up in Green Bay at Lambeau Field. I know there was a lot of good training seminars and kind of open forum discussions there for all of our customers. This year we're going to have it in Madison, Wisconsin, just a few miles north from where we are in Verona, Wisconsin, at the Monona Terrace. So Frank Lloyd Wright inspired building, absolutely gorgeous, overlooking Lake Monona. It is kind of, besides the Capitol building, the next iconic staple of our city here. So really those conferences are 2 days of learning, networking, sharing knowledge, kind of getting to know us personally and professionally, and kind of getting to really solidify the partnership that we have with all of you guys.
I forgot the other thing we might do for that next webinar: advanced Unity client. I'm thinking about it.
All right.
Let us know in the survey.
Exactly. Guys, if we let Andy just go off the chain here, you're going to learn a lot. It might be a little rogue, but it's always a good time.
So, as always, thanks for listening. This has been a presentation of your Navient Customer Care Group. Remember, if you need support, give us a call, 1-800-686-8789, or support@navient-inc.com. And please visit our new revamped website at www.navient.com.
Exactly. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.